Hello and welcome to this episode of Perspectives. I'm your host, Dr. Rondrick Williamson. Listen, I think we're all guilty of getting so bogged down in our day-to-day activities that we forget about some of the common things that people go through on a daily basis. Check this out. Listen to some of these facts. About 20% of children have learning disabilities. About 2 million children have been diagnosed with ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. 5.7 adult Americans have bipolar disorder. And in Macon, Georgia alone, 600 to 800 people are homeless. I know for some of us these numbers seem intimidating, but our guest today is tackling each one of these issues, one issue at a time. So help me welcome Ms. Paula Sims, President and CEO of Community Development Systems. How are you doing, Paula?
I'm doing great today.
Thank you for coming by and hanging out with us on today. Tell us a little bit about your organization.
Well, Community Development System is an organization, it's actually a behavioral health agency that provides mental health counseling services for children between the ages of 6 and 18. Will actually go up to the age of 21 if those children are still dealing with childhood disorders at the age of 21. We're actually located here, a site in Macon, Georgia, and we also have a site in Columbus, Georgia. We do a lot of in-home therapy counseling with the children and their families, and our goal is to keep children within the home and keep them from spending a lot of the state dollars by going into the YDCs or the local state hospitals.
So what inspired you on creating such an organization that has done such great work in this immediate community?
Well, I have a rich history in the social service agency and working with a whole lot of different agencies. Department of Family Children Services, I've done some services with EOC, worked as a family therapist with River Edge Behavioral Health Care Center, and then finally going into the school system, working 10 years as a school counselor. Well, I noticed that as a school counselor, I was dealing with a lot of issues that dealt with more school, but the children had a lot of more deeper issues that needed to be tended to. So I felt at around about 2006 that I wanted to go full-time and start this venture of helping the community have a more positive emotional and mental health on the community.
So what things has the organization done in the community here to help service the community and make it more, well, just a better place?
Well, I can tell you that when we're looking at towards the end of each quarter, we have a quality assurance manager that is often looking at the stats. One of the things that we do is we look at satisfaction surveys from our referral sources, as well as our parents and the schools and the courts to find out what they have to say about us. What we found is that they do see our clinicians as very dedicated to the mission. They like the fact that we are where we say we're going to be at the time we're going to be there. We do a lot of in-home. We meet them where they are. And one of the things that I think is great about it is we have a person-centered approach where a lot of times clinicians try to go in because we have that, what we call the one-up position. We feel that we have the training to tell people what they ought to do to make their lives better. Well, Community Development Systems approach is much different. We go into the homes to ask them, what can we do to help you to normalize your home? And I think that has been a great success with people calling back and making referrals to other possible consumers in the community.
So that kind of sets you apart from others.
It does.
So what type of professionals do you have on your team?
Well, for one, I have a clinical director that is a licensed marriage and family therapist, that she kind of oversees the entire clinical function of the company, of the agency. But I have a host of other licensed professional counselors. I have a licensed clinical social worker as well as licensed professional counselors. They also supervise master level and bachelor level mental health and social service type field individuals in working with the families and meeting the emotional and mental needs of the consumers.
Right. So some take-home questions. I know you deal with behavioral health. For parents that may be watching on today, what are some things that would trigger or some signs that signal that a child is experiencing some serious mental or behavioral issues? Is there something that the parents should be aware of, or some things that should be a red flag that would normally go up?
Well, you know what is an interesting fact is that there is a very thin line between normality and abnormality. It just kind of depends on where you are, what's normal and what's not normal. But I would say that, where one child may be able to deal with an extreme amount of stress, another child may not. So I guess the quick answer to that that I can think of is that whenever there is an emotional or mental issue that is happening or change in a child's life, and it affects their daily functioning, that they can't go to school the way they normally would go to school, or they're having problems with their friends when they normally didn't. That's the time when you should seek help, professional help.
Now, I know we had you on the show a couple months ago when we talked about bullying in schools, and that was an excellent show. I hope, viewers, that you were able to catch that episode. But what's the next step once you actually identify that the child has an issue? And like the bullying episode, the victim is still having emotional issues. So what things should we employ to go to that next step?
Well, first off, I think what's important is that as an agency, the things that we look at are several different areas when you're looking at the whole person. Especially as it relates to children and adolescents. You're going to look at the home, the school, community, behavior towards others, and mood and emotions. And so when you start to see that there are high numbers of incidents, let's say at home, they're not coming home on time, or they may leave and the parents not understand or know where their whereabouts and they're gone for long periods of time, or in schools they have high attendance issues. At that point, I think it would be important to contact our agency, Community Development Systems, and what we will do is either send a licensed therapist out to their home or have them come into the office to do a full assessment. We do have also a medical doctor and a registered nurse on staff that would also do a full exam to look and see if there are more deeper psychiatric needs where medication may help or soothe the issues that the child is going through.
So once the red flag goes up and the parent notices there's an issue, that's the time to intervene right then.
It is.
I know from personal experience, I know some individuals who were in school when I was in school, which wasn't so long ago, who began to cut school, began to misbehave out of character in school, and now they are out on the street, or they never completed their education. But at the time when they were cutting school, is that the time that the parent should have intervened to find some type of professional help for the particular child? Well,
yes, the answer to that question is yes, but also if you think back on the different areas that I gave you, school, home, and community, at every part of either the school, the home, or community, there's going to be somebody else also involved. If you think about it, the school officials should actually get involved in that, and they're going to start having meetings. Special meetings. Let's talk about what little Johnny is going through here at school, and perhaps at that point the counselor or the special ed teacher may say, we may make a recommendation to an outside referral source. As it relates to the community, you may have Department of Juvenile Justice that's come involved in the court saying, okay, you've made an infraction, maybe you've broken into vandalism of a car. So what we're going to do is get you attached to a program that's going to try to prevent you from coming back into the system. So I think that, for the exception of home, and that's probably the only place where the parent is going to have to say, we got some problems here and we need to seek some professional help. Outside of that, they have people that are there to help them to steer them in the right direction.
So I'm sure there are other organizations throughout the area that do similar work as you, but what type things does the parent need to do in order to get services? And another question is something like this covered under insurance plans?
Well, the first thing is that, and especially if they're talking about receiving services from Community Development Systems, we're actually located here again in Macon, Georgia. We have a local number, 478-743-8333. When they call that number, We will do everything. From that point, we have an intake specialist that will actually ask questions about the problem. We want to know if they have Medicaid, if there's a Medicaid number or no insurance at all. And what we're going to do at that point is go back and look at this child and look in the system to see if they're Medicaid eligible. For the most part, we're taking Medicaid and what they call CMO consumers who are either WellCare or Peach State. But I will say that in extreme cases where we are not accepting certain kinds of insurance, we will take those kids on pro bono because I think it's important as clinicians that it is our duty to make sure that we don't leave a child suffering from emotional or mental issues just because they don't have the insurance to cover. And we definitely would work with them.
Wow, that's excellent. Now, is there a certain time frame for therapy, or does it vary per condition that the patient or the child presents with?
It actually varies per the child and the condition. And plus it depends on what program. We actually have two separate programs, an intensive family intervention program that is more geared towards those kids who have extreme behaviors, that the behaviors are so out of control that they are very close to being placed outside of the home. Now we will work with those children from anywhere from 3 to 6 months top. But, however, once they've used those 6 months, we do have another program, which is a core program. Within that program, we're talking about individual, family, group counseling. We have a resource specialist that connects them with resources. Now, they can stay in that particular program anywhere from a year on until we have reduced that particular behavior and they are functioning normally in their life again.
Now, Paula, what would you consider extreme behavior?
I would think a child that is consistently not following rules in the home, that he's aggressive towards either his parents or siblings or other people out in the community or in the schools. When you talk about children who are bipolar, they have extreme mood swings. And many times the extremeness comes from lack of medication, or they have been prescribed medication, but they're not taking that medication the way they need to, and they're just kind of uncontrollable. And there are some diagnoses that you can't just deal with by having a behavior plan. It must be dealt with by using the use of medication, and those kind of kids are the more extreme children.
So what would you say would be the more common things that you see in children? Would it be things like I mentioned in the intro, ADHD, bipolar disorder, or?
From the perspective of community development systems, and like I say, each year, my quality assurance person will actually look at the numbers that we have. I would say attention deficit hyperactivity disorder would be one. Bipolar disorder is a strong second. There are two more that I can think of: conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder are probably the top 4.
Now, with ADHD, I know that's received a lot of press and a lot of conversation lately. Are you a big advocate for behavioral therapy or medicinal therapy, or both?
Well, actually, I believe in what they call an eclectic approach, which means that it just depends on the person and the individual. And a good therapist understands that when you meet a person, and through individual therapy, at least the first couple of sessions, you kind of understand in building that rapport and trust what kind of works best for them. For example, I would say cognitive behavioral therapy is probably one that I like a lot, and that deals with your perception and how you see things that kind of adds to the dysfunction you have. But some people are not, it's not really that they have this disability because of the way they see things. What do you do with those children who have issues because there is a biological or chemical imbalance that has to be met through medication? So it's kind of an eclectic approach that I think any good therapist would probably say that they would use, not just one approach.
So have you found that a lot of parents tend to label their children as ADHD or what have you, and not really know what they're talking about actually? Are there certain signs or?
I think that there have been an overuse of diagnosing of children
Right.
in the recent past, and I would say within the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think because a lot of that is because it's more accommodating,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives an explanation
Right.
to the behaviors, and perhaps even with some parents because they don't have the parenting skills that they need.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to accept that, you know, it might be what I'm doing with my child that's causing him to act that way. It may
Right.
be easier to say, well, you know what, he appears to have ADHD, but a lot of times they will take one symptom and think that, wow, that's what
That's
my
gotta be
child
what it
has.
is, right.
But, you know, diagnosing a child with a mental disorder is just like a physical exam.
Right.
When you go to a doctor and they diagnose you with the common cold, there are a set of things that they have to
Right.
see. It works the same way
Right.
as we're working out of what they call the DSM-4.
Right.
There are a set of behaviors that you have to find. If they're 10, they're going to say 5 out of 10 must be met in order for this child to be diagnosed or labeled, let's say, for example, as ADHD.
Right.
Okay.
Do you think children that are labeled ADHD and bipolar are seen negatively, say by the school system or by their educators, or when they hear that I'm receiving or there's going to be a child who's bipolar, a child with ADHD in my class, does that put a negative taste in the educator's mouth? Have you seen that, or do you think that's prevalent?
I think that they take caution. And what a lot of people don't understand is that, and which is probably the reason why school counselors were placed in the school system or in the schoolhouse.
Right.
Teachers go to college to learn how to educate kids.
Right.
They don't know a whole lot about why children misbehave.
Exactly.
So when they hear that there's going to be a child that's bipolar or ADHD that's going to go against the norm of what that learning curve or bell-shaped curve is,
Right.
then it tends to, I guess, build some anxiety about how am I going to handle this child and how do I maintain this child and keep the other normal kids on tap and focus with the learning that they should be doing.
Do you think they should be mainstreamed with the kids who haven't been diagnosed with those disorders? Do you think?
With my experience as a school counselor, I think some of the extreme behavior kids, I do agree with what they call pull out, because I think some children just cannot be maintained
Right.
in the classroom with regular children. But I think as much as possible that they should be introduced at periods of time
Right.
with regular kids, because if they're always taken and separated away from the mainstream, then they're never going to learn how to be a part of the mainstream.
Yeah, that's right, Paula. That's some good stuff. Welcome back to Perspectives. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Paula Sims. We're talking about a lot of different issues on today, talking about her organization, community development systems, but I really want to talk about some of the things I mentioned in my intro. The homeless rate, especially in the Macon, Georgia area, about 600 to 800 people are homeless. And now Paula is venturing on this new concept that's going to address some of those issues. So tell us about that, Paula, a little bit about your new foundation or your new organization that's going to talk about homeless.
Out of working with community development systems and a lot of families, we've learned that a lot of the children and families that we work with were either on the verge of homelessness or were homeless. So, you know, a lot of times in our meetings we were talking about some of the, what we call the ancillary kind of things that the mental health didn't deal with. What were the families experiencing? And that was one of the things that we really saw an issue with. So out of that, from Community Development System, the Diamond Foundation USA was born. And it actually is a nonprofit organization that is going to help the homeless or minimize the number of homeless people that are here in the Macon area. And probably after the first year or so of looking at how that program works, we want to move into other counties.
Has there been a spike in the number of homeless individuals?
from research that I've seen, it's about, in the past 2 years, there's been a 62% increase in homelessness in just here in Macon alone. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was I read an article back, I want to say between March and June of last year, that the Macon Telegraph had done, where they hosted, I think it was like a luncheon or a picnic for the homeless. What they saw was there was kind of a change in the homeless population. Most people, when they think about homelessness, they think about people who are walking around the street, they're sleeping under the bridge. But there is a new breed of homelessness that is actually very apparent here in Macon, and that's homeless families. And they're not necessarily living under the bridges, but they don't have what we call permanent residence. They may live out of their car, they may live with a relative, and either they have actually had a home and lost a home. So what the Diamond Foundation is actually here to do is look at those areas that homelessness actually works with. One of the things is mental and physical health. We want to make sure that we refer those kids out or the parents out to get the mental health that they need. There are a lot of physical illness among the homeless, so we're going to set up a plan of case managers that's actually going to work an entire plan for the whole person of each family member to move them from homelessness into self-sufficiency.
Now, do you think it's important for employment skills or resume writing skills or workshops around that, those issues? You think those would be helpful in those individuals who are homeless?
I think that they're imperative, and that's actually one of the goals and objectives of the Diamond Foundation is to support independence through teaching them life skills. We will possibly become connected with a technical college where they either will take a short-term or a little bit of a moderate to long-term type program that will lead into building those skills so that they can become employed and remain employed.
You know, there's so many different topics that I would like to discuss today, but I know our time is limited, but I do want to address one issue, and I know that you guys also do family and marriage counseling, and maybe we'll have you back on the show to address some of the other topics that I think that our viewers really need to hear about. But you know, I've seen that there's several people who've been married and in relationships for 20 and 25 years who have a home or multiple homes, multiple vehicles, children involved, and then they say, I'm going to cut it here. We're going to break our ties. What will make an individual do that after being with the person for 20 or so years?
I think in looking with the type of individuals or couples that we've dealt with, it's various reasons. I think the idea of going into marriage is very different when they get there from when they started out. I think I've heard a lot of people say that what I thought this was in the beginning turned out to be something totally different. It could be financial reasons. At one point we were doing well financially, and now things are not doing so well. And so, and I think it depends on the person and the individual. You hear a lot when they say, you know, it's important to choose the top 5 or top 10 things about a person that you really like, and that you can't you can't live without. That's really important, because what people have to understand is that there's no perfect person. And any relationship, there is the good, the bad, and the ugly. And a lot of times when the ugly starts to come out, people are not really ready for that. I think it's a lot of fairy tale that we kind of want it to be for us, and then a lot of people go in to be rescued from some things that individually they needed to have dealt with before they got married.
So if there's someone watching today who are experiencing marital issues, how can they get some assistance from your organization?
Well, and that's pretty much the same way we do with our children and adolescents. If they will call our office, we have an intake specialist that will take the initial intake and information, and then a licensed therapist will call back and schedule an appointment for them to come into the office to begin what we call an assessment of the family, and then we'll go from there with the individual and married therapy sessions
Right.
with them.
What would you say to a married couple and one of the individuals is for counseling and the other is not? Is that just a loss and we're just going to cut our ties and move on?
I think that it's always important for counseling to occur before the divorce.
Right.
Because a lot of times a person who is not so close to the fire is able to see some things that you cannot see because you've been in that situation,
Right.
to get you to understand why certain things may happen. And a lot of times it's like I say, you may have, you know, a person says, well, you know, I don't understand that when I say this, that he doesn't protect me.
Right.
But unknowingly, that really has something to do with you growing up as a child and the fact that there was something not there for you in your life that you have to kind of deal with rather than saying, I'm going to throw this marriage out of the window.
Right.
Is really, really important. So counseling to me is probably the turning point for any marriage to either begin again or end.
You know, and I asked that question because I have several friends and colleagues who are at the point of divorce and one of the spouses wants to go to counseling and the other doesn't. So it's kind of difficult to give my point of view on it if the relationship is one-sided, if one wants it and the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I kind of want to address that issue. And I think that's something that a lot of viewers may be going through today, and I think is really prevalent.
The last thing that I think can come to mind is that sometimes we can wait a little bit too long. And I think if you start identifying in the beginning that there are issues there in the marriage, even if you don't feel comfortable with talking to a therapist, maybe you can seek help from your pastor at the church,
Right.
but start somewhere where there's a mediator, someone outside of you and your spouse that can help.
Right.
And it possibly could save a lot of marriages.
Yeah.
And because, you know, the divorce rate is extremely high. It's extremely high.
Wow, Paula. Listen, there's so much more I want to talk about, so we've got to have you come back on the show.
Okay.
I do want to talk more in depth about this family and relationship issues and marriage counseling and this, that, and the other. I think it's something the viewers really need to know more about. And we appreciate you coming by.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to have you back again.
Thank you.
Listen, if you want to find out more information about the things we just talked about, how to get involved with community development systems, how to get assistance, the information is on the screen right now. Take it down. Listen, it's very important to seek professional help and assistance. Listen, you've been watching Perspectives, where you're not only informed but inspired. Have a blessed week.